Spoilers for the whole Mission Impossible franchise, but honestly, if you're clicking on this video before watching any of them, what are you doing? Go! Your mission is to watch Mission. Choose to accept it. I love Mission Impossible. Next to John Wick, it's been flying the flag for action across the past 10 years, with an emphasis on practical stunts and nail-biting tension that makes them endlessly entertaining and thrilling to watch. I really can't get enough of Ethan Hunt's antics. The gadgets, the car chases, the shootouts, the IMF teams, the scrupulous villains, the double-crossing, and of course, the masks. Lots of masks. After a packed summer season that has ended up being pretty disappointing all things considered, it's funny that Mission Impossible is back to carry the baton from John Wick 4 earlier this year. Once again, the standard for action has been set with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1.
That is written.
I'd be truly shocked to get a bad Mission Impossible movie. We've had only one so far, and even that one has a pretty freaking sweet bike chase in it. MI1 is the mission movie that always creeps up further in my ranking every time I watch it. Far less of an action movie and more of a straight up thriller. The first Mission Impossible is perfectly structured and paced. It flies by every time I watch it and features the best twists in the series. The way the finale ties everything together is very satisfying, and I love Jon Voight's villainous turn as Phelps. The fact that the character is a continuation from the original TV series, albeit recast, is pretty much the sole unifying link between the TV and movie missions. It was incredibly bold to turn a key character into a villain, proving that even when this franchise does something cynical, like bringing back a legacy character, it does it with real gumption. It's also easily the sauciest Mission Impossible. De Palma's trademark voyeurism and psychosexual underpinnings are present here, and it's interesting because the franchise never really delves into that kind of style ever again. This really feels like the origin story for the Ethan Hunt we know. He loses his whole team, and in the process goes from the smug quipping Tom Cruise to the harder-edged, focused weapon of mass entertainment that is Ethan Hunt. His ability, or inability, to save the people he loves becomes the driving force of the series from here on out.
I can understand you're very upset.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
MI2 is seriously so awful it loops back round to being entertaining. Dougray Scott chews the scenery as the anti-Ethan Hunt, and the pair fawn over Thandie Newton, and yet somehow the movie is about as sexy as rubbing your genitals on sandpaper. The only two characters that have any kind of sexual tension are Dougray Scott and Sean Pertwee.
I am gagging for it.
Not even the bike chase at the end can save it, in spite of some ludicrously delightful departures from reality. John Woo is a master of action cinema, and on paper seems like the perfect fit for this franchise. But hard-boiled, this is not. Hell, it's not even a hard target. I can't really hold it against him, since the movie was allegedly cut down to smithereens and he was supposedly targeting an R rating. In the grand scheme of things, this certainly feels like the gas leak year. Other directors would bring different styles to the series, but this is the only Mission movie that is so ridiculous, it's hard to imagine it being in the same continuity. Hey Julia, once I sped towards this other guy on a motorbike, whilst I was on a motorbike, and then we both jumped off our motorbikes and crashed into each other. It was literally insane. MI3 sums up just about everything good and bad about J.J. Abrams in one movie.
You think I'm playing? You don't think I'll do it?
From the moment it opens, it is emotionally charged by the idea that Ethan will lose his wife. Starting the story in media res was an unexpectedly great choice.
Inventory lists.
You have a wife, girlfriend? Because you know what I'm gonna do next? I'm gonna find her. Whoever she is, I'm gonna find her and I'm gonna hurt her.
When the late great Philip Seymour Hoffman exclaims that he will find Ethan's wife and hurt her, the audience knows that he definitely will do this, and it makes the rush to get to the finale all the more chilling. Hoffman is undoubtedly the best villain this series has ever had, and the notion of grounding Hunt in a post-fieldwork married life setting works to brilliant effect as he is pulled back into the action. This movie feels very influenced by stuff like 24 and Bourne, opting to try and be a grittier, grounded take on the spy franchise to counterbalance the brazen attitude of Part 2. There's some goofy bits that don't hold up, Benji's anti-God speech is whack, and this scene where JJ tries to make us care for Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Maggie Q 90 minutes too late into the movie is laughable. The rabbit foot would surmise JJ's entire career.
One thing. The rabbit's foot. What is it?
Promise me you'll stay, I'll tell you.
Stick around, audience, and I promise eventually the answers I've made you obsess over will come. Eventually. Even if I don't know what they are. That's the Abrams way. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is definitely the funniest and most light-hearted of the series, but it's also a return to form in terms of the espionage and spy hijinks. Where MI3 went heavy on gunfights and action, Ghost Protocol's best scenes occur during Cruz's death-defying Burj Khalifa climb and the IMF team's dual meeting with Cobalt and Sabine. This was actually the first MI I ever saw, and I always carry a torch for it. I rarely see it touted as anyone's favourite, but for me it's certainly a contender. There's just a playfulness and a commitment to fun that is unmatched by the other movies, even if some of them are stronger overall packages. From the moment Ethan argues with Benji and forces him to go deeper into the prison rather than simply leaving, you know you're in for a movie that will progressively chuck more and more problems at our characters in the most exciting ways possible. The gadgets are so good in this one. I love the Kremlin projector and Benji's drip drop maker thingy. That's the official name for it, by the way. Then there's the Spider-Man gloves, the deflooring device, the Renner floater upper machine. All these names are the official names for these gadgets, seriously. But the best thing about the gadgets in this one is the fact that they keep breaking. This theme is started with the busted mission phone which refuses to self-destruct and comes to a sweeping crescendo when Hunt's gloves fail him and the iconic masks are unable to be rendered. It was the perfect way of upping the ante and doing something different to what came before, especially after 3 movies of mask work.
I'd be more worried about the heat. And then there's that. What heat?
That being said, MI5, aka Rogue Nation, is the undisputed king of the missions for a reason. The opening set piece, which sees Hunt hanging off the side of a plane, is the absolute pinnacle of practical stunt work in the movie. The Opera House sequence is one of the single best edited action sequences I've ever seen. Just an absolute masterclass in intercutting action and tension. Solomon Lane and the Syndicate are great new additions, as is director Hunley, who has the best line since Anthony Hopkins' Mission Difficult in MI2. I'm going to play both lines one after the other, and try your best not to cream your pants.
This is not Mission Difficult, Mr. Hunt, it's Mission Impossible.
Hunt is the living manifestation of destiny, and he has made you his mission.
Oh my god. The movie introduced the best character in the franchise outside of the protagonist himself, none other than Britain's own Ilsa Faust. Rebecca Ferguson is one of the best actors working today, and her stint as Ilsa is absolutely captivating. You buy her as this absolute badass whose allegiances are constantly unclear, and she provides the perfect foil to Ethan. There's real palpable chemistry between them. Ilsa is a fan favourite, and she's as invaluable to the series as veterans Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg. It's funny that Renner was courted as the next lead in Ghost Protocol, only for Benji to outshine him, and then in this movie, Ilsa takes the cake as the coolest new MI spy. Rogue Nation has the best combination of action, fun, side characters and tension. Some of the other movies do certain things better, but for me this one is the most well-rounded mission entry that does everything at a high premium. Rogue Nation is the MI movie to beat in my humble opinion. MI6 aka Fallout was also fantastic, but it is the first time the movies really become direct sequels that you need prior understanding for, and I did find there was an alarming lack of gadgets. Still, this one has maybe the best pure action scenes in the entire series. That bike chase through Paris and the helicopter finale are insanely good, plus it was nice to just get a bit more Julia, capping off that thread in a satisfying manner. Solomon Lane makes a welcome return, but it's Henry Cavill's villainous John Lark that steals the show. From the moment he reloads his arms for the best single fist fight in the entire franchise, Cavill delivers on being the anti-Ethan Hunt in a way MI2's villain never could. As Angela Bassett puts it, Lark is the hammer to Hunt's scalpel. This all comes to a head in a fantastic finale, which sees Cruise fly a freaking helicopter for real. I was initially disappointed that Julia didn't have as large a role as the trailer suggested, but it was a welcome epilogue to the events of 3, and her presence helped the movie delve further into who Ethan Hunt is. His life is really kind of sad, and this movie sets up the idea that he will never truly stop until he's dead. At the same time, maybe him and Ilsa can walk off into the sunset together. They are the end game. And so that brings us to Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. Part 1. I'm pleased to report that Dead Reckoning is the action movie of the summer to beat, and a must-watch for anyone who loves bombastic, eardrum-piercing fun on the big screen. From an initial desert set shootout to watching Tom drive around in a tiny yellow Fiat 500 with one hand free, the action soars and never relents. The train set finale brings Cruise's commitment to practical death-defying stunts full circle as an ode to Buster Keaton's infamous train-destroying epic, The General. After oodles of CGI snooze fests this year, or movies that didn't quite make the cut in spite of some fun moments, Dead Reckoning has really delivered on the spectacle in a way only Cruise and writer-director Christopher McQuarrie can. The action of this movie is 5 stars. However, the story is a little convoluted. Whilst by no means awful, there's a few story decisions that prevent this one from beating the best entries in the franchise, and that's a real shame. This had all the makings of being the best mission ever, and whilst it's still head and shoulders above 90% of the competition, it can't beat out several of its predecessors. So obviously I spent a little portion of this video hyping up Ilsa Faust, so I'm sure if you've seen the movie, you'll no doubt be as surprised as I was to see her meet a permanent end. Ethan is forced to choose between newbie Grace and Ilsa, and is unable to save the latter when she fights Gabriel in a short-lived, somewhat underwhelming fight scene. A character that has served up some of the best action in the series goes out on a bit of a whimper if I'm being honest. I think people toss around the concept of fridging too much, but in this case, it really feels like it only really happens to further Ethan's story. This for me is the thing I found unforgivable for several reasons, and it leaves me in a paradoxical place because I simultaneously love the movie, I appreciate the immense craft that went into it, and I had a great time, but the death of Ilsa is easily the biggest cinematic disservice of the year. CGI Christopher Reeve sucks, but nobody expects those superhero movies to be better than that at the moment. Mission Impossible on the other hand has hit such consistent highs that a choice like this can only sting immensely. I don't want to decry the movie as sexist or anything like that, but it does feel kinda weird that you can only have one female character on the IMF team at any one time. Paula Patton is the only cast member from 4 who doesn't return in 5, which is when Ilsa was brought in as the new femme fatale. She then carried over into 6, Vanessa Kirby was introduced as the White Widow, but it was a fairly small role and she was never part of the team. Now in 7, it feels like the introduction of Hayley Atwell's Grace pushes Ilsa out of the picture, quite literally when Hunt is forced to choose between who gets to live out of the two of them. Killing off Ilsa Faust, the series' strongest female character and one of its best characters in general, replacing her with Hayley Atwell's Grace, a just fine replacement hero, is a huge shame. I didn't mind Grace, but it is funny that she's the first non-spy thief character on the team since Thandie Newton, and both their characters suffer from being underdeveloped. Couldn't Grace have a role in the movie without muscling Ilsa out of the story? Why did they need to be pitted against each other? Why can't you have 2 women on the IMF team? Why did Ilsa need to die to motivate Ethan? It's really surprising for a series that up until this point had given Ilsa a lot of time and care with her story. It's hard to criticise with precision because we don't know all the ins and outs behind the scenes. Maybe Rebecca Ferguson didn't want to do them anymore, and McQuarrie felt like he had to write her out, but at the same time, the series drops spies all the time with no explanation. Paula Patton and Jeremy Renner, 2 Ghost Protocol alumni, drop out of subsequent movies with nay mention. Hell, in the last movie, Ilsa just so happens to bump into Hunt whilst he's on a mission. It would have been perfectly acceptable to suppose Ilsa is just off globetrotting, doing something else whilst the events of Dead Reckoning Part 1 go down. Now having seen where everything went, I wonder if it would have been better to have Ilsa sit this one out so she could come back in a way that was up to the same standard as her turns in Rogue Nation and Fallout. Ving Rhames' Luther sits out of Ghost Protocol right till the very end for a brief cameo. That was a shame at the time, but I would have straight up hated him appearing in a couple of scenes, only to get killed off midway through that movie.
Oh man, you know I got this.
I know.
Having him take a break so the character could come back in Rogue Nation onwards ended up being the right call. Don't get me wrong, if we can have an Ilsa appearance I'll take it, but if it turns out she's going to die before her time, maybe I'd have preferred she'd come back later down the line with a story that really benefited from her presence without killing her off. It also felt lame because Ilsa has been established as one of the best spies in the series. She's an absolute nuisance for Team IMF in Fallout, and she kicked the Bone Doctor's arse in Rogue Nation. Yet here she loses to Gabriel? I didn't mind Gabriel as a villain, but he wasn't set up as a physical force of nature akin to Ilsa. I didn't buy that she got taken out by him of all people, aside from the fact that the plot demanded it. Essa Morales was a great on-screen presence, and I enjoyed him whenever he was talking, but less so when he was fighting. After you give us a physical threat like Henry Cavill's Walker, or even Ling Ying's Lark Decoy, having Gabriel whoop Ilsa and Hunt just doesn't seem very believable. No disrespect to the actor, but he didn't move in a way that felt on par with those other villains. Ethan's reaction to Ilsa's death also felt really muted. In MI3, the whole movie hinges on Ethan's ability to keep his wife safe, and he loses his marbles trying to do so, almost literally. That movie makes their marriage the emotionally charged thrust of the narrative, and you really care about seeing them make it through. I suppose you could make the argument that Ethan is becoming more and more desensitised to loss, but he just didn't seem as enraged as I would expect from her death. I know having characters die can add to the stakes, and I'm not necessarily begrudging the movie for trying to do that. I don't think having it happen in the manner that it did, midway through the movie without marking a striking tonal shift, was the way to go about it. Hell, considering it's a part 1, if Ilsa had died as the big cliffhanger to part 2, that could have possibly worked better. But look, I'm no Christopher McQuarrie. I guess it ultimately makes me really sad, because I felt like Ilsa had been the end game ever since she was introduced. Her and Ethan deserved to be together, and I really wanted them to eventually get that happy ending walking off into the sunset. They're both two sides of the same coin, and they've both given enough. Now I'm not really sure where Ethan can go from here as a character. It would feel odd to double down on his chemistry with Grace, because then she really would feel like a swap for Ilsa. Having Ethan die on the job seems somewhat fitting, but also unnecessary for the character. At the same time, who does he have to walk off into retirement with now? Benji and Luther? Maybe that could work actually. Mission Impossible, Thruple Daddies. If you're going to go down the route of killing Ilsa, then sure, but it needs to be a far more weighty moment. That's the kind of dramatic turn that feels like the cliffhanger leading into part 2, not the second act closer to give Ethan some revenge motivation in an otherwise banterous third act. Aside from this, is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning worth watching? Hell yes. And it must be seen in the cinema. That is the absolute best way to watch it, IMAX if you can. At a time where we're overloaded by shoddy green screen blockbuster drivel, jam-packed with fan service and cameos, I feel dirty even criticising this movie when it pulls off the action that it does. Watching all the behind the scenes promos, it's clear that everyone involved put an unholy amount of work into making this as much of a blistering spectacle as possible, and I hate the idea of taking away from that or putting anyone off seeing it. In spite of my issues with the handling of one of my favourite characters in the series, Dead Reckoning is just as worth watching as any other MI instalment. Rest assured, you will have a blast with Dead Reckoning Part 1. I just think that for perhaps the first time in the series, making up the story during production has finally bit them in the arse. Ghost Protocol had to reshoot an early scene because Brad Bird admitted they didn't have a clue where the story was going. But that movie and its subsequent sequels didn't have to deal with any weighty sci-fi concepts, like an AI entity trying to usurp the entire world. The John Mark reveal in 6 is something I can see them pulling off as they're shooting it, but the story of Dead Reckoning feels like it needed some more drafts. The action in this movie is 5 stars, the story is 3 stars at best. However, much like the key MacGuffin, the only way to authenticate Part 1 is to combine it with 2024's Part 2. Only then will we know how well this movie works as a story. I'm still hopeful the second part will flesh out some of the more vague corners of the script. Unfortunately, hoping that Ilsa faked her death or was someone else in a mask is a pipe dream. But honestly, how can you watch them crash a train akin to Buster Keaton's The General and then follow it up with the best live action approximation of Uncharted 2's train opener without having a huge grin on your face? How can you not marvel at Tom Cruise in a high-speed car chase with only one hand free? I'm intrigued to see where the AI storyline goes in part 2, and it remains to be seen if this will indeed be the final mission. If you're going to go see anything blockbuster flavoured at the movies this week, skip Dial of Mediocrity in The Flash, and go spend that hard-earned cash on the IMF's biggest challenge yet. You won't regret it. What did you think of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning? And how do you feel about the end of Ilsa Faust? Are you as bummed out as me, or am I being a big baby? Let me know in the comments below. And as a bonus, tell me what your favourite Mission Impossible movie is. A big thank you to my full fat tier patron, Dr. Chike, and Nathan Shaw. If you'd like to donate money to my Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/fullfatvideos. If you'd like to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos. And if you'd like to find me on Twitter, you can find me at fullfatvideos.